Alright, this is my biannual, at this point, birth story video. For babies I've been on YouTube, I come on and share a birth story when they're about 3 days old. I was actually looking back through my birth stories and I noticed that I always make the video when they're 3 days old. I guess that's just when I'm like, well, I've been laying here and now I think I'm ready to sit up and talk about the birth before the details get any less fresh. So this is Victor Isaiah. He was born 3 days ago at 2 in the afternoon, or 2:23 in the afternoon, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, and 20 inches. So he falls right in line. All of my boys are within just ounces of each other. I plan to have Victor at home like all my other boys, and I fully planned for him to come within 2 days of the due date because my last 3 all came plus or minus 2 days of 40 weeks. Victor came 3 days. Of course, this depends on like which due date you go off of, but I think I'm gonna go with the one that I was originally thinking, which would make him very consistent with my other kids in 3 days past. But I was kind of going off of a different date throughout the pregnancy, and so I was anticipating the birth more this time than usual. With most of my kids, I planned to go late because that had been my experience. So when the due date rolled around, I hadn't really been anticipating the birth yet because I didn't really expect to have the baby by now. Victor, on the other hand, I had pushed my due date a few days earlier based on a few factors, and then I even, because my last child came 2 days before the due date, I started to think that 2 days before, I'd probably have him too. And so this put me in a dynamic where I was anticipating the birth more, which in my opinion is not good. I always describe my last birth, if you want to check out the birth story of my 7th baby on here, as like the most ideal situation ever because I had had all the babies late up till him. So when I started having contractions 2 days before the due date, I hadn't psyched myself up for labor, and they really caught me off guard, and just mentally it didn't make me anxious because I hadn't thought about it. Whereas with Victor, not only was I starting to anticipate it, but a week before even that, I started having prodromal labor for the first time ever. So for those of you who aren't familiar, prodromal labor is where you get real contractions, not Braxton Hicks. And since I've never experienced prodromal labor in any way, I thought for sure that I was having the baby a week early whenever I had that first sign of prodromal labor, because anytime I've ever felt a real contraction, it has always led to a baby within 24 hours. Because of all of these factors, having my last baby a couple days early, having the due date a couple days earlier than I think that it really should have been, and the prodromal labor, I really started becoming anxious about the birth. I know that's probably weird coming from me because I've had such, if you followed along with my birth stories, I have nothing to be afraid of. All of my births have gone fabulously. But the way I was describing it to one of my sisters, because although they've gone so fabulously, I've been able to relax through the contractions and manage everything so well, it's still this intensity that comes upon you, and when it does, you have to surrender to it. And I think I was just fearful of going through that process, especially with all of the false starts. I really got more in my head about it leading up to it. So for probably a week up to birth, started to think like, oh boy, at any time this is just gonna start and I just gotta be ready for it. And it started making me a little bit anxious. Not like terribly so, but just anticipating it more than I usually do. I feel like usually I let labor just kind of catch me off guard, and I've been so busy I haven't had time to think about it and to stew on it or worry about it in any way. But this one was definitely different with that prodromal labor. Okay, so fast forward, we'll just skip through all of the nights that I had prodromal labor. I had it, I would say, at least 4 nights during that week where I was up till 2 or 3 in the morning, not able to sleep through the contractions and thinking it was it. By about the 4th night of it, or maybe even the 3rd, I started realizing like this is not it. Like I'm not gonna be having the baby just because I'm having a contraction. And so I was able to sleep a little bit better because I was still having the contractions, but I wasn't on high alert that it'd be like time to call the midwife, because I could tell that it just wasn't really it. It was something different that moms talk about all the time that I've never experienced. So I was able to get some rest and realize that, okay, I guess whenever I really go into labor, how am I gonna know to call the midwife? Because this feels exactly like normal labor. but then it stops. So on Monday, which is 3 days after my due date, when I woke up, the contractions that I'd had overnight didn't stop. I told Luke that I think maybe things are a little different today. I mean, it still feels the same, but the contractions didn't stop, and that's different from any of the other nights. And so I stayed in my pajamas that morning. I had a gown on that I was sort of planning to wear during the birth, and I settled into what would be my Labor Day. So I got into the Miles circuit to increase contractions because I felt like I wanted to get them going if this was going to be it, or maybe even if it was prodromal labor, I could make it be it with the Miles circuit. So the Miles circuit is 3 positions, each a half hour. So I spent an hour and a half doing the Miles circuit. Meanwhile, Luke and the kids did all the chores. I opted out of milking the cow and just anything. I just settled into this is what I'm doing today. I even took a bath, washed my hair. It was around 10:30 and I started to notice that the contractions had completely stalled out. I think I'd gone like 20, 30 minutes without having one. And I'd already texted the midwife in the morning, which is, if you know me, is very weird. But because of all the prodromal labor, and I'd done a little bit of research on that in a Facebook group, a home birth Facebook group that I'm in, and everyone said that when they had prodromal labor, they had a much faster labor. It was like all of the contractions that led up to that kind of were taken off the top of the labor, and spoiler alert, I definitely found that to be true. But that ended up being something that made me really nervous because I'm like, I'm gonna not get the midwife here. And I know a lot of people do free birth and all of that. I just feel more comfortable with an attendant. And so I have had one unassisted. I've also been to my sister's where hers was unassisted, but I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted my midwives here. So I just gave her a heads up because I knew she probably had appointments that day, that I'm having contractions and they seem different from my prodromal labor, and they are not really different, but they have continued. I'm doing the Miles circuit. She told me to do this thing where you pull up on your belly during a contraction because we're trying to figure out why I was having all of this lead up labor. Maybe it was bad positioning, and so that's why I was trying some of these techniques like the Miles circuit, like the pulling up on my belly. I forget what that technique's called, but she sent it to me from Spinning Babies. So around 10:30, I texted her and said, never mind, everything seems to have completely stalled out. I actually am gonna pull up my text. My sister said that she screenshotted the text because she always likes to look back at them, but then they get buried really fast because we text each other all the time. I texted her at 8:25 a.m. I'm doing the Miles circuit, trying to keep contractions I had last night going. I feel like I'm probably being too hopeful, but usually it stops in the morning. And then I said, I'll let you know if things pick up. And then at, I don't have an exact timestamp on this text for some reason, I said, seems like everything totally stopped. It's the weirdest thing to be having contractions I have to lay down and relax through, and then nothing. I'll pick back up on this text thread here shortly. But I completely changed my tune and my strategy. Suddenly I was sitting there, no makeup on, in my Miles circuit, in my comfortable gown, like thinking about labor and kind of like, is this ever gonna happen? Not that I was really that late, but it's just all of these false starts get you thinking that. And all of a sudden I snapped out of it and I was like, what am I doing? This is not how I do labor. This is how you get yourself into this fear, tension, pain cycle, dwelling and getting worried and anxious. And so I just suddenly had this realization, what am I doing? I know better after this many children. The strategy that I have is we ignore it as long as possible, go about our day. That is how I'm able to somehow dilate quickly and without very minimal pain. So I took off that gown, I put on a skirt, I put on makeup, braided my hair, put on an apron, and I went outside and Luke's like, what are you doing? You were in labor, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I'm just gonna go about my day and forget that this ever happened. I started making mozzarella cheese. I started making some sourdough pizzas. I made flower arrangements. At this point, it was Monday, and I had planned to, I've already had the baby. This is when we decide, we know when we're gonna have children. I was gonna be sitting in bed with the baby all that week and next. I had planned my content around that. I'd already shot the videos I needed to shoot, the podcast, the blog, and now I was able to sit in bed for 2 weeks. The only problem was there was no baby. And so in order to get my full 2-week break that I wanted, and this is all relative, I I could just not put out a video, and that's fine too. So in order for me to be 2 weeks ahead, apparently if this baby's not coming this week either, I'm going to need to get up and maybe make a video. And also I thought this would distract me. So I decided to start vlogging, even though I had zero plans of doing that. I was like, Johanna, let's make some mozzarella cheese. Let's do flower arrangements. We'll just like do homemaking. I'm gonna forget all about this. I'll make some ricotta. And I made a little reel on Instagram showing that, because this is my normal labor strategy and it works so incredibly well. But because of all of the false starts and the anxiety, I had forgotten about it. And I was settling in to my labor day way too early. I was feeling the contractions way too much and I needed to get distracted and just ignore the fact, especially because they were slowing down, and then I was in my head about that. So around 11, I would say, 11 a.m. So I guess they only stopped for like a short time. They started to come again, but maybe like 10 to 15 minutes apart. I was doing all of my things that I was doing around the house, and I just had to pause whenever I'd have a contraction. And I'm gonna actually still post this vlog that I recorded that day, even though it's like half a day, because I ended up having the baby. You'll just see that throughout the video, whenever it comes out, that I'm just pausing during the contractions, but very much just going about my day. None of the contractions feel incredibly overwhelming. Around noon, I'm outside in the garden with Luke. We're doing cut flowers and he's kind of filming me and with me. I am starting to realize like maybe this is picking back up and maybe I am not gonna be able to keep doing what I'm doing anymore. Around 12:15, I come in, Johanna has finished up the pizza that we were making earlier and I have no appetite, and I tell my family, you can eat, I'm gonna go lay down. Of course, at this point I have no idea how close baby is. This is 12:15. So I come into my room, I get into my Bradley method, and I talk about the Bradley method a ton. It's the reason why I don't do water births, and I know that people just swear by water birth and how amazing it is. But with the Bradley method, once I get in bed and get into that deeply relaxed state, I can ride each wave like so incredibly well. I don't even feel pain from it. I mean, I feel incredible intensity, but not pain. So I came in here to settle into my Bradley method. I recently watched on Instagram, there is a lady, Leslie Burris, and she does all of her I think she's done 3 births now. Her last 3 births live. Like, she starts her Instagram live whenever she's going into labor, and she just leaves it up for all of the hours and has the baby right there on Instagram. And she did this Christian hypnobirthing app. I think I had read about it somewhere else too. Maybe it was the Happy Home Birth Podcast Facebook group. I quickly downloaded that on my phone at like 12:30 because I was like, I don't know, I want something to listen to. And it has a track with all of these scriptures, and then it has this visualization thing where you're breathing in through your nose and then blowing out dandelion seeds. I was nearly asleep at like 1:30 in the afternoon because of this hypnobirthing track and my Bradley method. So around, I'm gonna go back to my text thread here, 1:43 p.m. I text my sister, okay, things picked back up. I told the midwives to come because I'm nervous. And she puts, oh yay. And I put, it's the classic thing where if I lay down, it stays nice and slow, but if I get up, they are on top of each other. But I'm just going to stay lying down. At this point, I'm feeling a lot of pressure with each contraction. And although the contractions still are probably 10 minutes apart while I'm laying here, I can tell that they are those end of labor contractions. Sometimes it's not the timing of them, it's the intensity of them, it's how long they are, and then also if it's accompanied by pressure, like you can feel like the baby's right there, then I know it's the end, even though it's not 5 minutes apart, all of the like, what they tell you. If it's 4 minutes apart, 1 minute long for 1 hour, I don't go by those signs because I have not had the midwife make it on time with those signs. I go by, okay, I can tell this is like opening me up the very to the last centimeter at this point, and I feel like the baby is right there. Do you want me to come get some kids? You're welcome to come over. I think I'm just going to let them stay outside. I have no idea if I'm close or still really far away. I'm just not wanting the midwife to not make it. So this is like where I'm still in denial, but obviously if I'm calling the midwife, I know, because I don't call the midwife unless I know. And I said, and I don't really see it stopping at this point. And then she comes over. This is 1:43 when I first texted her, so I think she got over here around 2. The text to the midwife, okay, I guess I said 10:30 when I thought everything stopped, but actually I texted the midwife at 9:30. 9:33. I said, I feel like everything stopped, so I'll keep you posted if they ever start again. This prodromal labor is for the birds. And then at 1:02, okay, so I guess I texted her quite a bit before I texted Laura. 1:02, it's definitely picking back up. Oh really, what's going on? If I walk around, I can make them very close, but I'm laying down mostly now. Are they staying close? How close would you say? None close since lying down. I might just stay lying down for a little while. But they're pretty strong when they come. Okay, keep me posted. I'm home for the day. And then I say, they aren't super close whenever I stay lying down, but I'm afraid that I'll wait too long if I wait to call you. So this is me like, yeah, they're not close, but I know that I should just tell you to come. Do you want us to head out? Yes, I think so. Luke texted that one. He took over my phone at that point and texted her. Okay, so that's the last text to her. She shows up at 2:15 and she is greeted by Luke running out to tell her that I already did my first push and the water broke. So she comes in and the baby is delivered at 2:23. So she was here for a grand total of 8 minutes, and that is exactly what happened with Theodore. When my midwife was pulling in, my water broke and then I pushed him out within less than 10 minutes. So it was the exact same, and the other midwife didn't make it at all, but the first midwife did. My sister came. It was like literally the exact same situation, except I had Theodore at 10-something p.m. and I had Victor at 2:23. I feel like those prodromal contractions came right off the top of early labor, because otherwise the labor followed the same pattern. With Theodore, it had contractions overnight, and then I had early labor all day, and then it kicked into high gear, even to the point of the contractions only being like 5-10 minutes apart. But me feeling that pressure and knowing it was time to call her just because of that pressure and intensity, and then her making it within 10 minutes. So it was just all shifted about 8 hours forward, because I probably had 8 hours of labor throughout the last week and a half that just was, I guess, dilating just in a really slow pattern. I really had prayed for a daytime labor and delivery with this one. I wanted so bad to do my distraction method, whereas whenever I was contrasting this labor to my labor with Daniel, not Theo. Theo was my last one. He was born at 10 p.m. So the distraction thing worked perfectly because I had to make dinner and I was finishing up some videos. And so I was very distracted with him, and he was born at 10 p.m. But with Daniel, I labored all night and had him, I believe, around 7 in the morning. If I went back to my birth story, that would probably be wrong, but it was in the morning, and there is no distraction to be had overnight. Everybody's asleep, and so you get very in your head about it. And his labor definitely felt harder because on those earlier contractions, I was already having those thoughts and doubts like, oh, I know what's to come. I'm thinking about transition and pushing him out. And so I had just prayed really hard for a daytime labor with this one, and that's exactly what I got. A few things that happened during the birth. One is he had the cord around his neck, which is very common. The midwife just unlooped it, and I don't know exactly what happens like if she hadn't made it with that, because I had a really long cord, so I think he probably would have still came out. I don't know how tight it was. It wasn't a huge issue. She just mentioned it. Another thing is I did bleed quite a bit after the birth. So before the other midwife came, she had already given me a shot of Pitocin in my leg because she said that it was more blood than she was comfortable with her being there alone. I don't really know how much it was. I had just had him and she just right away got the Pitocin and said that you're bleeding too much. But then that was it. Because of the bleeding, she wanted to get the placenta out really fast. So she had me push almost instantly. I think within minutes the placenta was out, and then she kind of pushed on my uterus and after the Pitocin to make sure that I wasn't bleeding excessively, and she was pretty confident pretty quickly that everything was fine. They told me just to take iron over the next couple days or several days. Probably I'll just keep taking Floradix because I did lose blood, but it's been 3 days now and I haven't experienced any abnormal symptoms. So I think it was totally fine, but that is something that midwives do. They carry Pitocin in case of excessive bleeding. Now, of course, if it's too crazy, they would have to transfer you to the hospital. I did also tear a little bit, but it didn't need any repairs. That's been the case for the last couple births. There was a small tear, but I didn't need it to be stitched. I think that's probably because I push really fast, and I know that that's not the strategy that you're supposed to do, but whenever I start to feel the urge to push, I am like, oh man, I am done with this. And so I just push like exceptionally hard to get the baby out really fast. But I don't think that's the best thing for your pelvic floor, but it's just always what I do. So the takeaways from this birth that I feel like I've learned throughout several babies is, again, I love the Bradley method. I was laying there in my Bradley method position, which if you aren't familiar with what that is, you can check out the book. I'll actually link it below, but it's called Natural Childbirth the Bradley Way. And they teach you this very specific side lie position where like your arms are resting on a certain pillow and your knee and everything is very supported. The whole goal is that you can release all of the tension that is everywhere in your body. So from your eyebrows down to your toenails, like everything. I was able to get into this such a deeply relaxed state. I can't even describe it, because sometimes before I'm in labor, I think, am I gonna be able to get into that relaxed state? And then it's like riding a bike. Like I just remember how to do it. This time I could tell that the power that was going through me was extremely intense and that I was in transition. But just like with Theo's birth, I was able to relax right through it. Now the births before that, all of my other home births, I'm always able to handle everything really, really well. And then during transition, I like pop off the bed because I feel like it pulls me off the bed and I just can't relax. But with Theo, I learned that it was possible to relax during transition. And then I carried that into Victor's birth and I 100% was relaxed. I don't think I even batted an eyelash during transition. And it truly was just not the transition experience that I remember, because I think before Theo, I just thought that it was impossible to relax during those last few centimeters, that last push. And I once again learned that no, it's totally possible. I feel like I was probably even more relaxed this time through transition than even Theo's. So I was very encouraged by that. I really couldn't have asked for a better birth. It was, just as close to pain-free as it could possibly be. All thanks to some deep relaxation and my ignoring it strategy. My distract yourself until you can't anymore. To me, whatever can keep you out of that fear, tension, pain cycle. So whether that is listening to scriptures, ignoring it, distracting yourself, a combination of both. So for me, early labor, distraction is key. And then once I'm in that, I can't walk around anymore because I don't want to have a contraction standing up, because if I can't be deeply relaxed, it's not going to be good. Another thing I was thinking whenever I was leading up to the birth, having a little anxiety because of all of these symptoms that were really making me think about it way too much, was you forget about all of the hormones that are present during the labor process that are going to be carrying you through when you're there, but they aren't when you're thinking about it beforehand. And so you just have to remember that whenever you're just thinking about it, that cascade of hormones isn't there to support you. And so it's not an accurate assessment of how you're going to feel in labor, if that makes any sense. I heard that somewhere and that made me really realize, okay, you're right. I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about how am I going to relax and when that intensity comes upon me, but I'm not in labor right now. So I'm not equipped to deal with that. All right, well, that is my positive, basically pain-free birth story of our 8th baby, our 6th boy in a row, Victor Isaiah. We can't decide exactly which of our sons he looks like, but we're kind of thinking our firstborn son, but they change a lot too, so it's hard to say. We of course think he's just precious. He's nursing great. He seems to be doing really well. My afterbirth cramps are just worse this time than average though. That's one thing I've been experiencing. They're always bad, but this time they're just exceptional. So I'm really hoping that ends. We're on day 3. He's 3 days old. So I am hoping that we're about at the end of it. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. And I will be sharing that vlog in the next couple weeks where you can see some shots of the labor and my distraction method. And I hope that this was encouraging. If you're planning a birth, I hope that you know it can be peaceful. It doesn't have to be chaotic and crazy. All right, well, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you are brand new, please hit that subscribe. I normally make homemaking content, and I'm just gonna be taking a couple of week breaks, so you'll see videos of me still pregnant. And after I fully recover, I'll be putting this boy in the wrap, and he'll be joining me on all of my homemaking adventures. All right, thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse.